So, imagine a business model where you can literally invest billions of dollars, spend over a decade toiling away in state-of-the-art laboratories, and after all of that, still face an incredibly high probability of absolute failure. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's the day-to-day reality of the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industry. It is a massive, high-stakes gamble. Research and development, or R&D, is the engine that completely propels this sector, but it involves a monumental risk of product failure. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how that gamble works.
Welcome to The Explainer. We're taking a deep dive into the fascinating and, frankly, high-risk, high-reward business model of biotech. And our lens for this? We're using the SASB Sustainability Accounting Standard. Think of SASB as the ultimate scorecard. It's perfectly designed to expose the very real financial and operational risks these companies have to navigate every single day, right from the lab bench all the way to your local pharmacy shelf.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the R&D pipeline, then move into clinical trial risks, pricing pressures, post-market safety, and finally, ethics and supply. Let's jump right into Section 1, the R&D pipeline, the high-stakes gamble. Getting a newly discovered molecule out of the lab and actually into human testing is just a monumental hurdle. The SASB standards specifically track the volume of drugs making their way across phases 1, 2, and 3. Why? Because this gauntlet is exactly where the gamble is either won or lost. A company might start with a dozen really promising drugs in phase 1, but statistically speaking, only a tiny fraction will survive long enough to secure regulatory approval. And remember, every single failure means millions of dollars, and years of intense research are just gone. Poof.
Adding a whole other layer to that risk, pharmaceutical companies rarely run these trials all by themselves. They outsource, usually to clinical research organizations, or CROs. Because of this, the SASB standard heavily scrutinizes exactly how companies manage and oversee these third parties. Think about it. When you transfer your most critical, sensitive clinical tasks to outside organizations scattered across different global regions, your need for absolutely airtight auditing and oversight totally skyrockets.
Which brings us to Section 2, Clinical Trial Risks, Protecting the Participants.
Once human testing actually begins, the ethical and financial risks just multiply. We are talking about strict, non-negotiable adherence to good clinical practice, or GCP. True informed consent isn't just getting a quick signature on a piece of paper, it means ensuring total comprehension and truly voluntary participation. If a company fails to uphold these standards, regulatory authorities will step in and terminate the trial. They will stop a billion-dollar R&D gamble dead in its tracks.
And the financial fallout of failing those trial participants, it is severe. SASB explicitly tracks monetary losses. We're talking fines, civil judgments, massive settlements, stemming from clinical trials in developing countries, specifically those listed on the Access to Medicine Index. It is a really stark reminder of exactly how costly ethical blind spots can become when you're operating on a massive global scale.
Moving on to Section 3, Pricing Pressures, Recouping the Investment.
So what happens when a drug actually beats those incredible clinical odds and finally makes it to market? Well, the intense pressure to recoup those massive R&D costs immediately begins. SASB focuses really heavily here on what's called the wholesale acquisition cost, or WAC. As the baseline list price, the WAC is the anchor point for all the intense, high-stakes pricing negotiations that follow.
But the real story here is in the spread. SASB tracks the percentage change in both the weighted average list price and the net price. The net price being the WAC minus all those negotiated rebates, discounts, and returns. Watching this spread exposes the incredibly intense downward pricing pressures from insurers and healthcare systems who are constantly trying to contain costs. You see, the sticker price on the bottle is rarely the actual profit that goes toward funding the next wave of R&D.
Next up, Section 4, Post-Market Safety, the ongoing nightmare.
This right here is perhaps the most sobering metric in the entire SASB standard, tracking the total number of fatalities associated with a company's products. Companies have to continuously monitor adverse event databases, like the WHO's Vigibase, because once a drug leaves the highly controlled bubble of clinical trials and actually hits the general population, entirely unforeseen safety issues can suddenly emerge, exposing the company to massive liability.
And it's not just the drugs themselves. The manufacturing facilities must maintain incredibly strict good manufacturing practices. If an FDA inspection goes south, the regulatory hammer drops hard. We're talking warning letters, non-compliance violations, sudden product seizures, mandated recalls, and really strict consent decrees. Every single one of these violations is a direct, immediate threat to shareholder value.
Managing these post-market risks also extends all the way to the very end of a drug's life cycle. The SASB standard actually asks companies to report the total weight in metric tons of unused products accepted for take-back, reuse, or safe disposal. This is strictly mandated to prevent incredibly dangerous scenarios. Think black market sales, prescription drug abuse, or the accidental release of active pharmaceutical ingredients right into the environment.
Finally, Section 5, Ethics and Supply, Surviving the Market.
Out in the market, there's also the hidden but severe threat of counterfeit drugs. These are fake or substandard medications infiltrating the supply chain. They might even lack the active ingredient entirely, which presents a massive health risk and absolutely destroys public confidence. To fight this, companies are basically forced to deploy high-tech traceability throughout their entire supply chains, relying heavily on barcode and RFID tagging to lock down their distribution networks.
Once the authentic product is completely secure, the sales tactics themselves are heavily scrutinized. Look, there is an undeniably huge financial incentive to push boundaries to increase market share. But if a company crosses the line and promotes a drug for unapproved, off-label uses, they invite massive legal proceedings. And you guessed it, the SASB standard tracks these monetary losses dollar for dollar.
So how do they manage all this? Well, pharmaceutical companies actively mitigate their vast supply chain risks by participating in really rigorous third-party audit programs. A prime example, tracked by the SASB framework, is the RX360 International Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Consortium. By ensuring that both their own facilities and their top-tier suppliers participate in these audits, companies can verify the true integrity of their raw ingredients and protect themselves from massive disruptions and reputational damage.
The big takeaway here is that the SASB framework acts as a perfectly tailored risk dashboard. It takes the incredibly complex science of biotech, the years stuck in the lab, the massive clinical trial hurdles, the stringent manufacturing constraints, and it translates them into clearly measurable financial risks. Creating a breakthrough drug is truly only half the battle. Surviving the regulatory and market gauntlet? Well, that's the whole other half.
I want to leave you with one final thought today. We've seen just how precarious the R&D pipeline really is, and the absolutely staggering investments required just to bring a single drug to market. But how does this high-stakes balance of risk and reward ultimately dictate who gets access to essential healthcare? When billions of dollars are on the line, how do we ensure the world's most vulnerable populations aren't just completely priced out of a cure? It's a hugely complex reality, and for sure one that demands our continued attention.